Well, welcome today to our on-location broadcast being taped here at MPI WEC 2017 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Our topic today is risky business, all about event security, disaster preparedness, and we have two experts in the field here. Marianne Bobrow with Bobrow Associates and Michael Owen with Evengenuity. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hi, Tyler.
And so you guys actually did a fairly long program here at MPI on the topic. Why don't you fill us in on how that went and some of the things you discussed?
Why don't you start?
Well, thought it went very well. This was the pilot program. It's part of a long-term commitment by MPI to risk management and emergency preparedness to the industry. And there are a number of things that MPI should probably talk about, not us, that are planned, but it's a long-term look at emergency preparedness and risk management, risk mitigation in the meetings industry. Marianne and I are longtime collaborators, or co-conspirators, as we like to say, from volunteer positions in that. So we began to look at it last year in light of some very good efforts that are going on the building side. The MCEM-SSI that is going on with ESCA and IAEE. We're in the meetings industry, so I hope you understand these
Alphabet soup, yeah.
And then we looked at them, and they're very good efforts, and they need to be a part of what we're doing, but they're focused on building security. I probably shouldn't say but, and they're focused on building security. And we had the notion together, we were having I think a festive beverage towards the end of a conference or something, and I said, you know, the planner or meeting owner has the ultimate duty of care. Okay, so there is a role to play there. I'm just curious as to where we are in this new world with new things that are happening in the headlines every morning, sadly.
Yeah.
And what we were doing about bringing our risk and emergency work up to speed as planners. The other thing that largely that those programs focus on are the terrible things that we read in the paper every day, such as active shooters and terrorism, which clearly are important. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, sadly, before a meeting, gatherings of people, soft targets, etc.
And those things grab the headlines and are on top of everyone's mind.
Those, and as they should be.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity to look holistically at emergency preparedness. Because as catastrophic as those events are, they're much less likely to happen than even some natural disasters or other man-made disasters or disease or a variety of things. So we began looking at that, working on, almost a year, or over, about a year that we've been working on that. And then we discovered that MPI was working with the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security, NCS4, who's done magnificent work on gatherings such as arenas, colleges, marathons, stadiums and that. And MPI asked us, since our work was complementary, supportive of what they were doing, if we would work with them to translate their language, which frankly they teach FEMA, Homeland Security they work with, but to bring their language and their understanding of and adapt those programs that have studied, proven risk and emergency preparedness elements and bring it into our world. And that's what the purpose of, that's how we got started. And this was the first MPI Emergency Preparedness Certificate Program that we did yesterday.
So what's important is that as we began our research over a year ago, we started to really uncover a gargantuan amount of material and started laughing about the fact that we had so much material that how are we going to condense this to a 60 or 90-minute session. We did that, and that is a session we call Bullets, Bad Guys, Fire, and Brimstone. And I think there's an add-on that says what you don't know can hurt you. And we did a webinar for MPI and kind of threw it up as a test bubble. Had great attendance, and we were able to ask them questions, which was important. And it became very obvious that most people did not have emergency preparedness plans.
I think Paul Van Deventer mentioned here that 50% of planners don't.
That came
have-
from the webinar. That's
Yeah.
the statistic
Yeah,
from the webinar.
and the discovery beyond that is of the 50%, they had not reviewed or renewed their plans in 5 or more years. So there's a real need.
Yeah.
In Nashville, 2010, we had a 1,000-year flood. Okay, we hope that we're never in the news for terrorism or active shooter, but we could be. But I would say the likelihood is probably equal, if not greater, that we'll get hit by another 1,000-year flood than that happening. That's not to say that we can ignore those things. We have to think about them and address them. But we've both been a part of situations. I was in Atlanta the week after the tornado that blew through downtown Atlanta in the building that it struck. In Nashville, you had Gaylord, you had Opryland, and we use a video in the session that talks about what a great job that they did, the Gaylord Opryland Hotel, in evacuating 1,500 guests. Just amazing. It was not
That's
really
a
part.
giant hotel too.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was not really part of a plan, but how they reacted and what they did is a textbook study of how to take care of your customers in an emergency situation.
What was really, really interesting is that we're very grateful to Nashville for allowing us to use that video.
Yeah.
There had been a video right after the 2010 flood, and we kept talking about it. It was an absolute case study on how things should be done. But like most properties, you don't want to show a lot of things that you just don't want to show. The Hurricane Katrina was the same way.
Yeah.
You don't want to see windows blown out, that sort of thing. But this one is very much testamentary, where you have various of the stars from Gaylord telling their story, telling what happened, and what was evolving in their personal lives, where their houses were being flooded.
Sure.
It's a great element to that. But what I find most exciting is that once we did that, and once MPI reached out to us and asked us to collaborate on with NCS4 on the immersive is what we call it. It really became something that was a labor of love, because for the first time you have a program that is long enough, or as we found out, almost long enough, to really give the attendees at how-to risk management on how to build a plan. And, sure, it's great. You might have had one 15 years ago. How does that relate to the world we live in now?
Yeah.
It doesn't. So we had the ability to work into modules, various elements and factors, and then to engage people, we added videos that would either make them laugh or really validate a point. It was a really good first effort. And, as presenters, we see we could do this, we could do that, and it would be even better. So it's really something that we are excited to do.
What kind of questions came up, did people ask? What's on people's minds about this issue?
It's the kind of thing that I hoped they would ask about. Most people, if you go to a 1-hour session, all you get is, here are the 4 parts of the grid, and you need to do this, that, and the other thing, but nobody tells you how to evaluate it, how to actually conduct that assessment, because there's never time.
Yeah.
What can you cram in 60 minutes, especially if the experience level in your room is all over the place.
Yeah,
If
sure.
it's all a one-on-one, you can take it this way. If it's experience, you can do a deep dive. But if it's a group that's mixed, you cannot do that. So we were able to answer questions like, okay, think of this, do a table, make sure you have some element of scoring in it, so that when you're assessing your risk, you're not using emotion. You're not using your worst fear to assess that risk, but rather you're using the most probable likelihood events to happen. Because one of the big things in that room was active shooter.
Sure.
And as we know, while it can and probably will happen, we know not where, and if you put it on your own likelihood scale, it will not bubble to the top, even though some tried to make it high.
No one wants to really think about that issue. It's just so horrific, I think.
Well, what we've learned in this time, immersed in this, is that many of the most catastrophic things that could possibly happen are the least likely to happen. That doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare for them. You should, but you have to understand sort of where they are on the risk scale and how you can invest and how you can prevent them. One thing I've said, I said, let me use my house as an analogy. I got a big old steel door at my house. I got all kinds of dead bolts and everything else. I've got cameras. I've got alarm systems. I've got everything else. But the truth is, if a bad guy wants to come in, he's coming in.
No, he can't. You have Bubba.
I have Bubba. I have Bubba the wonder dog. But the other thing, I tell you, a real kind of a light bulb for me during this is talking about planning, how we plan meetings. And I say that here's what I said. I said, okay, so how many of you have the Bible, the event Bible? It's this big. You guys are detailed. By nature, we're visionary and detailed. So you have to the instance, to the minute, what's going to happen, and how many of you get to a conference and it happens exactly that way? Everybody goes, ha, ha, ha. The thing that occurs to me is that the process of risk planning is not dramatically different from the process of event planning. You plan for what it's like Rumsfeld said, you have your known knowns and your known unknowns and your unknown knowns and your unknown unknowns and that gobbledygook. But it's true that you can only plan for what you can anticipate, and there are certain things that you can't stop, but you plan as much as possible. So we talk about in cybersecurity that convenience is the enemy of security, right? So in this instance, you could say complacency is the enemy of security. Not planning. It's duty of care. It's due diligence. One of the things we asked, this was on our very first webinar we did, is what about, do you put risk planning as part of your RFP? A good friend of mine wrote me offline. She said, oh my God, I can't even get my room nights or my F&B and one thing and another. And the point we were making is not to do the risk planning during the RFP process, but to put a stake in the ground during the RFP process. To explain the expectation is that we will have a security meeting, and we expect you to share need-to-know information from the venue. We'll share need-to-know information to the venue to put together a robust plan.
And that is absolutely key. For years, and I go way back to right after 9/11, where you would ask a hotel, and at that time, what did you know? You said, I want to see your security plan. And it's like, no.
Yeah, sure.
No, you're not going to get it. But now I think the world has changed.
Yeah.
And I think people are more understanding and willing to collaborate, and that they're willing to work with you. I don't want to see your whole plan. I have nothing to do with it, because you have a whole big building here, be it a convention center or a hotel, whatever it is. And you have a duty to everybody and everything in that building. So odds on, you're not going to be in my little corner of your world. And I need to know what I need to do, because as a planner, I have the duty of care to take care of my people. What am I going to do with them before, during, and after, and how am I going to find them? And how am I going to account for everybody after if you don't share at least this much on a need-to-know basis with me?
Well, what is the communication hierarchy?
Yeah.
Who is going to report? Who's going to be the late? Do we call the police? Do you call the police? If you call the police, who's going to tell me that you've called the police? All of those things they're part of planning 101.
Yeah.
It's stuff we do all the time as it relates to our regular work and planning an event, all the detail that goes into it. And it's another thing to do. And Marianne, it's much like we said with connectivity. We're at a point in the operating environment in which we have inherited or sadly come to, where risk management can no longer be an afterthought. It needs to be top of mind. It needs to be considered on everything. We're not here to try to scare anybody. We're just to suggest or make anybody paranoid. But we do want you to be prepared.
Yeah.
And you can only be as prepared as you can, and then still expect things to go crazy wrong, because they could. They do on a non-emergency basis. They do all the time. I call it building Frankenstein, right? So I start in May building Frankenstein for an event that's going to happen in November, and we found an arm here and an arm there and a leg here, and we stitch his head. We put a bolt in his ear, and we put another bolt over here, and one thing and another. And we get to the day of the show, and we say, Frankie, you sit in that chair over there, and don't you move till I tell you to. As soon as you turn your back, he's in the buffet line before the CEO. That, to me, is, in essence, meeting planning.
Yeah.
It is. But let's talk a little bit about MPI's big picture plan, which is part of what we do find so exciting. This is only the tip of the iceberg. You know, there was a plan developed. It is proprietary.
They have a certificate program.
It is a
coming up,
certificate
right? Yeah.
program. And then we have our separate little part that we've done elsewhere, which is also, we think, very good. But here's the ability to take the whole scope of what goes into that process and really start detailing it down, find appropriate supporting documents for it, and really come up with a here you go template for the participants that take that. Isn't that a wonderful thing to be able to go back and go, oh yes, I can do this, this, and this. And that's just wonderful. But then think of the other opportunities. As we talked to the attendees, they said things like, we'd love levels so that I'm not with a novice if I'm experienced. And we get that. What about those that do international, either inbound or outbound? That's another thing.
Yeah, it's a whole other issue.
Is that an add-on to something? Who knows? That's for MPI to decide, not to ours. I'm sure there will be webinars, probably push out to the chapters as benefits to all of its members. We're guessing here.
Yeah.
But there's so much more that can be done, and MPI has dedicated, I think it's 5 years to this project. I think that's what they said in the opening last night.
Well, and the work we're doing, the session that we'll be doing tomorrow afternoon here, is content that we created and based on. One thing we both, as you know, were involved with Apex. Mary Ann chaired for 3 years. I chaired for, I think, 2. And that new working model has taught us a lot about the approach. And so much of what happens, like we thought about poaching a few years, that there was a lot of conversation for many years about poaching, but there was no data. It was all anecdotal.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you have here. This is not the first time, as a good friend Carol Krugman said, oh, good, honey, this is probably the 20th year that this has come up.
Yeah.
And so
right.
what the notion is to use, gather data, to, rather than telling stories, which are important in understanding how things were affected and what people did about them, is to gather data, understand as best we can how things work and what's the best practice and what does Homeland Security say. I just was able to do our session, and our session is complementary and supportive of the NCS4 work, but they're not the same thing. A lot of the same themes, but ours is a quick overview, an hour, 75-minute overview of what to expect, risk mitigation processes, and that sort of thing. And we're able to take that. I was able to take that to IMEX on behalf of the Events Industry Council.
You're talking Frankfurt.
Frankfurt.
Yeah.
Right. And I was very concerned. I mean, I told Mary Ann, I said, gosh, we really have to internationalize this. And what I found over there is that while much of what we've learned and much of the real meaty stuff that we can tell people and tools that you can use come from our Federal Emergency Management Association and our Homeland Security. Now, those things don't apply in Europe, except that a best practice is a best practice. And this is what I said to the European, and I've challenged them. I said to them, I said, here's the thing, understand, this is where I'm going to bring this to you, and if you can poke holes in it, then that's good, but understand these are best practices in an emergency situation, and they should be, they could be globally applied. What's happening in your region, in your country? What tools can we introduce to our community that says, in Spain, this agency recommends you do X, Y, or Z, or in Germany, you know? And I think what we're trying to do as we move along is not only teach and send them home with a certificate, but engage them in the conversation going forward.
Yeah.
Well, what's also interesting, and we can't say this as statistic, but if you look at the group that we were with yesterday, I would say 90% of them, 95 maybe, didn't have the first clue about how to create a plan. They simply didn't have one. Now that number may be high,
Yeah.
but they came to learn because they didn't know how to do it.
And these are probably planners just by benefit of being here. They're interested in learning about the profession. So, I mean, you would think out in the wide planner world, there's probably even less adoption of this.
Well, and think of when we talk about the planner world, we're also talking about a group of people who don't bear that title,
Yeah.
but who are engaged in that work, and were anything to happen in those organizations, they would be the one responsible for it.
And you can be criminally liable as well as your organization and yourself financially.
Well, that's the conversation that came up.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about, it's very much like a model that we've used in the past of equipping people to understand responsibilities and to have the right, ask the right questions, have the right conversations to be as prepared as possible. And this goes for venues, it goes from one side to the other. And that's it. And so one of the questions that came up, well, what about criminally? Well, we're not attorneys,
Yeah.
right? We have attorneys involved in the effort, but we're not attorneys. But I would say to them, I said, we're talking about the meeting planner. You as the meeting planner are responsible for putting this together. The meeting owner is ultimately who's responsible, but at the same time, it's your responsibility to bring it. And one of the great conversations that we had is, how do I take this back to my CEO and make
Yes.
them understand that we have to invest time? It's not money.
No.
It's forethought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could be money.
Could be money,
Because
right.
remember, some of the elements, there are people, we cannot assume all businesses have everything they need to protect that business.
Right.
And its employees. So we have to assume that some of them aren't insured properly.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they've done something new in their business and they never thought to ask, is there an insurance I should be adding to mine? And that, insurance is one of the top areas of mitigation, is you're going to shift that risk.
Well, when you talk about threats are technological, natural,
Man-made.
or man-made. Those are the three areas for which could create a threat. And knowing that, and knowing that addressing each of them takes a little bit different skill set. The other thing is that and this is a light bulb that came on while we were working with the guys at NCS4, is we're addressing this, the venues are already addressing this, which is great. But an incident could take place at the venue, on the way to the venue,
Right.
or away from the venue.
Sure.
Think about the Iceland volcano.
Yeah.
Think about today. The airport's closed because it's too darn hot.
Yeah.
That's
Now-
Phoenix.
Well, somebody said just a minute ago that they thought Las Vegas had as well. But in regard, even saying that, all right,
Yeah.
so you've got a conference that starts today, and you've got folks who are either coming from or flying through Phoenix. Okay, so is that an emergency? It's a weather incident. Mm-hmm. So you could say that, look, that's a disruptor. Now, can you plan for that? Would you ever plan? I've never heard of an airport closing because of heat, so you would never plan for that. But what would you do in case there's a disruption in travel? You could think about how you did that.
And that's what most people struggle with. I think some of the good takeaways we had from the session, because you always learn from your audience, is we started talking about threats and incidents and what would constitute each. And it was interesting to see, depending on experience level and nature of the work, the answers were quite different. This person was very, very concerned about active shooter. This person was very concerned just about the world because they didn't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And then there's this person over here who's in the international arena, and they're more worried about kidnapping.
Really?
Because it happens, if you think about certain countries, kidnappings are quite prevalent.
And certain profiles of attendees.
This is a group of executives,
Yeah.
Yes.
all top-level executives, and they meet all over the world. So they have that concern. And there are a variety of others that come up depending on, preparedness is just a matter of looking what could happen. We have provided some good tools for assessing risk, for saying, okay, let's take a look at what is least likely to happen, most consequence, most likely to happen, least consequence, and where in the scheme of things do they happen, and how do we approach these as best we can, right?
And then you take and you give them a body of resources.
Yeah.
The obvious ones are FEMA,
Right.
DHS, that sort of thing. But there are some others out there that are very good resources for them. And the reason that those kinds of resources are good is because they are timeless. Because all you give them is the resource, and if that's been updated, you go out and it is the most updated information. There are more people who don't even understand. There's a world of opportunity out there to learn more. And I think at this point in where we are in the world, we need to actually think that this is something we really need to incorporate or reincorporate into the mindset of the meaning professional, that risk management is one of their duties.
Sure.
And I would call them more competencies, and that they have to become more current on what those competencies should entail. And that's going to be something that I think we need to push into there, is this is your job. It used to be how many cups of coffee are in a gallon of coffee,
Yeah.
or how many drinks are in a bottle of wine. I say that depends on who drinks
Two,
it, but
maybe.
yeah, two.
Yeah, really.
That was my answer, two.
One
Well, that's him.
is one. And it generally has a bag wrapped around it. So.
It's just the bag.
But that's a whole nother story.
I thought you brought the box.
One of the things we did that we just wanted to see what the reaction was is when everybody went to dinner. I took all the identification off of a rolling case, and when they went to dinner, I put it out and I set it down. So they came back, and we were just warming up and one thing and another. And one fellow spoke up and he says, "I don't know if I should say anything, but there's a bag over there." And one person over here looked around. She said, "Oh, it's been here all day." Somebody else said, "No, it hasn't." I said, "Well, good on you, because I didn't think any of you would recognize it."
Yeah.
But those types of things, and how unusual is it for us in this industry, particularly if we've got a program that's closing with flights out that afternoon, to wind up with suitcases in.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we have to watch. I'll give you an example of what happened here. I was here in April with a client. I was finishing up, their session finished up in the afternoon, and I was going to fly out after. They were in Grand Garden Arena. So I'm coming down the hallway. I have my bags, my suitcase and my computer bag, and I started to go in. The sheriff guy said, "You can't go in there." Of course, I've got all access, one thing and another, and he said, "You can't go in there." Because I've been involved in this, I immediately said, "Oh crap, I've got to walk all the way back over there," but I would have done it. I was not going to argue with him, because
Sure.
One of the staff came over and she said, "Look, he's on the team." And he said, "Okay, well, you can go on in." And later she came to me and she said, "I'm so sorry, that shouldn't have happened." I said, "But it should have."
Yes.
He didn't know me from Adam. Here's a man that he doesn't know, and rolling in a suitcase. You understand that what that could be,
Right.
right? Now, thankfully it wasn't, and thankfully I'm very grateful to you to get me in, but encourage them to do that. You don't want somebody to be able to walk in there with a bag like that.
So what's really interesting is that the group collectively really wanted to focus on active shooter because that's something that was top of their minds. It has to be. You open a newspaper,
Yeah.
you watch TV, listen to the radio, whatever. And we could put a session together on active shooter, but all we would be doing is really replicating what's already out there. We don't need that. You can go out to FEMA and you can learn in an online course, which I believe is free. Don't quote me on that. But you become a student, you get an ID, and you can take an online course. And if you want to, you can test out at the end and then get a certificate that says you've been FEMA certified, not certified, but whatever they say for the certificate.
Well, and one of the missions is trying to take some of the mystery. I mean, because when you talk about risk management and active shooters and tornadoes and earthquakes in California, I mean, you can kind of be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And trying to take some of the mystery out. And it occurred to me this morning, I said to them, I said, let's think about risk management. When did you first learn it? College, and as a kid. Think about your parents taught you risk management as a child. Really? Yes, to go to the street, look left, look right, look left before crossing. And things like that you've come up unaware that you were doing risk management, but that's exactly what you were doing. So to kind of remove the mystery and the scariness of it as just a part of due diligence, I think is one of the things that we hope to accomplish.
Do you think a lot of planners just don't want to bring it up because it's just such a dark subject with their attendees?
No.
I mean, they probably need to let their attendees know that we've taken this into an account and you need to keep your eyes open. And
If I'm correct, and I think I am, there is a time issue. It takes an awful lot of time to first develop that plan. And when they're on their 18-month cycle to planning a meeting, when's the right time to throw in, oh, by the way, you need to create this plan.
yeah.
But it really is critical. So if there's a way for them to step away from the crazy day-to-day activity and take that immersive session that will give them the tools where they can then come back and it won't be so daunting. Because when we were doing threats and risks, it was like, okay, now you're in Chicago, now you're in San Francisco. What are you going to do? Well, what do you have to do first? You have to research it. So they weren't able to answer the questions, but we did want to put it in their minds that this is a process you have to go through. It's a learning process before you can even build that plan.
And once again, it's not dramatically different from the event planning cycle.
That's correct.
Right.
I would say that if I went to someone who was new in the business and said plan a conference, that would be daunting. Okay, but once you've done your first one, then you have data to plan your second one. And it's not that it becomes easier, it just becomes part of your processes of doing a meeting. So yes, to put together your initial plan, you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? But once you have that plan, then you apply the plan, and just like anything else, it's a cycle. You go through the planning and the mitigation and what could happen, then you go in the post and you say, here's what we thought would happen, here's what happened, here's what we did about it, here's what we could improve on. Then it becomes improvement process instead of just risk planning. But it's a constant review, or at least an annual review. And I said to them today, I said, so you do a post-con so that planning your next meeting, you know your room pickup, you know your F&B. Now, thanks to Apex and some work we did a few years, you know your Wi-Fi usage, and you should know how everything worked. And hopefully, the greatest thing is, the thing about the absolute best thing about a comprehensive risk plan is that you don't have to use it.
Yeah.
That's very true. And it's interesting, if you reflect back when we first got involved with connectivity and bandwidth, one of the things we came up with was the fact that most meeting professionals were not putting requests for audiovisual, for bandwidth in their RFP. So how do you really know if you had a proper venue? When the RFP was first done, you know, it was how many fans are in the room and how many telephones are in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And all of that kind of stuff. Now we're talking technology, we're talking risk, and so we first started incorporating that in any of our bandwidth sessions, is you need to incorporate it in your RFP so that you know whether the property is right for you. Fast forward, room block poaching. And we did the same thing. There was a white paper, there was a summit, and the outcomes all started with, this is what you need to do in the RFP as it relates to room block poaching, and we are now saying that very same thing again. You need to ask the questions now about risk management and security plans, and probably a few other things that haven't been even discussed, but they do need to be incorporated into that RFP.
Who do you talk to at the property about that? Or I imagine, do you talk to as a director of security? Or
Someone brought up, and these are planners talking, right? Someone brought up, if your convention services manager is your point of pivot, to say, you know, then you make it clear to them that part of our conversation is not only to identify who my banquet captain is, or I'm going to see you, or depending on the hotel, the teal jackets or the red jackets, or I'm going to have this contact. It's going to be in the event of an emergency. Who is going to inform me if there's a local incident that I may not be alerted to on my phone?
right.
Who am I going to approach? If there's an incident in which I need first responders, who do I approach? I tell the story that happened to us, and I'm not proud of it. A little over a year ago, we were in a hotel having an event, and my partner does all the event management and tablecloths and stuff like that, and I don't know why I'm there. I guess moral support. But the florist guy was working. He was putting together everything, and he just froze. And everybody looked across the room and realized that something was going on. Quickly took him out, laid him down, put his feet up one thing. Turns out he had a stroke.
Oh.
Mild stroke. Thankfully, he's all right, let me say that. And we immediately called the EMTs, who were there in 20 minutes. What we didn't know, and we should have, is that there was an EMT crew on the property, very large hotel convention property. Had we known that, we could have had them there in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, everything worked out well. That 10 minutes could have been life or death.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of going clearly and say, okay, EMT, what do we do? Closest hospital, where's the closest hospital? What do we have for here and there? So, you know, I think, Mary Ann, this is something we've not really talked about. I think there's another thing that the buildings need to talk about, and that's what happens if you have a mass casualty incident or something where you may need to use that property to shelter people from a tornado and that. So that's not our responsibility as meeting planners, but it's something that they need to think about, the building.
Yes, I remember back to 9/11, I had a very large veterinary group, and veterinarians are very familiar with anthrax and all of that. So we were 2 weeks after 9/11. So you can imagine the level of intensity of everyone's nervousness.
Yeah.
And we did a session, and we had asked the speaker to do it on anthrax because there had been outbreaks of it and threats of it right after the 9/11 incidents. And he actually got up and spoke and said, you don't have to worry about the anthrax. What you got to worry about is the cyanide in the building and a few drops in the air system, and the entire building's population is gone.
Wow.
So you just learn things from everything you do. But getting back to your question about how are you going to get this information, several things, and the attendees yesterday brought this up as well. Get your CBB involved, or
Right.
destination management
Sure.
company, or whatever it wants to call itself in that location, because they're all different. get them involved, because you not only want to know what the building is thinking, but you also want to think about who are the first responders. Is it EMTs, or are you in a convention center where you have to have them anyway? You have to look at your rules and regulations and see if you're required to have them. Who are you going to get them from? You know, you just go to the phone book and look up EMTs? No, there's a different way to do that, and the CVB can help you do that. In the hotel, I don't know, is it the director of sales? Is it the CSM?
Probably
I don't
different
know.
with each hotel.
Different with each hotel.
Yeah.
I don't know that it really matters. I asked one of the hotels I'm doing a meeting in, so what happens if you have to evacuate the hotel? He said, I don't know. I said, would you please go find out? and I did find out the answer, but nobody thinks about it. All we think about is that security person sitting at the table telling us, I'm your person, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I don't want, it's too late then
Yeah.
to get the information I want. I use the analogy of the bandwidth. If you want good reports on your usage, you have to ask for them 6 months to a year in advance, not the day before, because you're not going to get the same quality of a report. So again, I think the duty falls on the planner population to go out and find the information they need and do it while they're doing the RFP.
Well, we do a full section too on stakeholders. You know, who are
Yes.
the stakeholders? Who are affected in that? But stakeholders could also be who are you going to involve. And one of our attendees said, look, I got a small group. I've got like 2 in my office. We have 500 people who come to our conference. And I said, well, how do do you have contract labor? Most of us, when we go in another city, we have people who are working with us. Do you have a DMC, transportation company? Because some of that, they need to be involved in that conversation. So your staff is not just your core, it's your key people, no matter where they come from. And so, for instance, if in her case, she said, well, we have volunteers, and said, man, I can't get volunteers. That has to, if volunteers are part of your core staff, and that is your core staff, they have to be part of your emergency planning. Even though we all understand the advantages and disadvantages of working with volunteers on a program, if your volunteers are going to be door checks, they have to make sure that somebody has their badge on, or they have their wristband, or what have you. If they're going to be, for instance, if there's the natural tendency is to go out the door you came in. No matter what building that you're in, no matter what convention center or whatever, if you came in door A, you tend to go back out door A. So how are you going to make that announcement? If there's been an emergency, we need to leave. Or please note that I'll have a red shirt standing by door C. There'll be another one here. Follow, and you have them in the corner. So there are many eggs, so the accuracy and detail, even of the announcement that you make. Let me ask you a question, Tyler. How many times have we been in a meetings industry program and the alarm go off and we sit there like lumps?
Right, yeah.
Should we be doing that?
Or in a hotel.
In a hotel?
Yeah.
Waiting for somebody to come in and say, oh, it's okay. No, it's okay. I tell you, I am not paranoid, even through all of this, and we've learned an awful lot. I am not paranoid. But I'm also not going to sit there if an alarm goes off and wait for somebody to tell me it's okay. They can come tell me it's okay when I'm standing out front.
Right.
It's true.
I'm just not going to risk it anymore.
And the other piece of that is the communication component. While some have emergency plans, they don't really have a companion communication plan. And I remember years ago, I worked for lawyers, and they were being instructed on how to, it was right when lawyers were able to market themselves and sell advertising. So they went and they had a professional person come in and teach them how to sell themselves, how to do their elevator speeches and all that. And they got to be videotaped on a 3-legged stool that had one uneven leg. In order to teach them how to communicate while being in a very uncomfortable position. And that really works, to teach people how to do that. But how many people have a plan that says, okay, we've got 3 people here, and you're going to be key on being the spokesperson. We can say, are you going to say something that could cause damage to the organization's reputation? No, so there's a whole communication plan that goes along with the emergency plan that really hasn't been talked about before now. It existed. I'm not saying we found it, but we're actually taking a deep dive into every single component, and communication is bubbling up to the top.
Communication is key. Roles and responsibilities. An interesting thing that came up. I say this, I love my business partner. We've been 18 years, still successful. I'm a pie chart, she's a spreadsheet. She's the detail. She's the thing that makes the engine run, right? I think about stuff and sell stuff I have absolutely no idea how to do, and she figures out how to do it. So she's fantastic. She's also a little nuts because she'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and she'll still be standing and doing things at 2 o'clock the next morning, only to start the cycle again the next day. This fellow brought up an interesting point. So she would be key, right, on our event. She would be the key person. He brought up an interesting point. He said, I am not a night person. I'm a day person. He said, so what I do is that I have this shift, and it's sort of similar to the concept of manager on duty. In his instance, I said, you could call it risk manager on duty. So he has the responsibility, the book, the overall vision of what their plan should look like. And then when it's time for him to go relax and the night person to take over, there's a handoff. I thought that was a very interesting approach.
It was a very interesting approach.
And are there contract issues here, or what should a planner be aware of when getting into the contracting phase with the facility?
Actually, we talked about that yesterday because we had not talked about that. And certainly there are going to be legal issues that will arise. And I'm sure as we talk about how to expand this, that there will be further. But as one of the attendees said, I want to know basically what kind of legal issues, so I can tell my legal what I need to do and then have them do their work. So they weren't asking for legal advice. They're asking, what are the trigger points? When do I really need to go looking for legal advice? It was an enriching experience for us, I have to admit,
no kidding.
Because these were all very bright people. And very good at their jobs, very competent. It was very evident by the questions they asked. There was not a dumb question in the room.
Well, I asked one.
We're not counting you.
So we're kind of getting near the end of our program here. Any final thoughts? You guys are, you're not done with this project, I take it, huh?
We're not.
We're kind of the Al Pacinos of, the Michael Corleones. Every time we think we're out, they pull us back in. In this case, gladly. To be honest with you, this is it was a great experience. We began working on it, again, about a year ago, just the two of us. And then to be asked to join the MPI program and experience, we actually went to Hattiesburg. The NCS4 is based out of the University of Southern Mississippi. And we went down there for 3 days. And
you went and visited them.
We did.
Wow.
We did, and we spent time with their team, who are amazing. The work that they have done is absolutely amazing, and working with them for now, what, 5 months? But working together to try to bring this, what they have learned into our world. It's been challenging sometimes because, Marianne and I have volunteer habits, but we also have to work to support our volunteer habits, right? So it's been challenging from a time standpoint. I wouldn't take anything for what I've learned and the connection that we have made with NCS4, and let me just say one thing about MPI. I've said this several times this weekend, and I've been thinking it for some time before we got here. As longtime members of MPI, we've been members of the organization through times when we were Kool-Aid drinkers, absolutely on board no matter what they did, through times when we'd go, well, what the heck are they thinking? We just don't know. Or gosh, they're turning over another CEO or something like that. To be in a place after better than 20 years for us, where we see that the organization has taken a bold, I think, step to lead a conversation and share it with the rest of the industry. I may be as proud of this organization today as I've been in my entire 20 years involved. And there have been times when they could have done anything and I wouldn't have criticized them. But I will say, thanks to Paul's vision, Christy over in the Academy, and Matt Marisol, who does the content in that, the commitment is impressive and proud. They're going to share this stuff, some of the stuff with the Events Industry Council so it can be distributed widely. And I'll just say hats off to the guys and women who run the organization. I think this is a bold move. I think it's something that's long overdue, and I think it's going to make a difference in the lives of not only the members, but everybody in the industry.
And I'm going to take that one step further. I totally agree that the direction is it's wonderful. It's what's needed at this time. It's forward-thinking, and it's intended to embrace the global community, and that I love.
That too.
But I also want to recognize the worker bees from MPI who have been so diligent, and Lori Pugh and Misty Helms and Virginia Hall and all of the MPI worker bees. Jessie States.
Oh my gosh, rock star.
Absolutely.
Christy
She is
Sanders.
a rock star.
Oh, buddy.
We did the webinar with Jessie. Our very first webinar on this issue. Nobody ever remembers that there's a lot of people out there that backstop everything that we do. And they have been just absolutely
Bless their
wonderful.
hearts, and I mean it in the best possible way.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us
Thank you.
today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And thank you for out there in television, computer land, for joining us. And stay tuned. We spoke of Paul Van Deventer. We have a interview with him coming up to close out the program. So thank you for joining us today. We're here with Paul Van Deventer, President and CEO of MPI. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Tyler, as always.
We're here at MPI WEC 2017 in Las Vegas. Really quickly, how's the show going?
Energy's great so far.
Yeah.
We've got our highest registration since we were last here in Vegas in 2013. Really exciting that we have a majority of the attendees, 60% are planners, and we have about 30% of our attendees are new to MPI. So really showing we can diversify our community and attract new people to this really valuable Congress.
And really, I mean, there's an overarching message here, right? I want to share that with our viewers.
It's stop planning meetings and start designing experiences.
Okay.
And for us, it's so important in today's environment that you get out of the traditional way of doing meetings and look at how you create an experience for the attendees.
Yeah.
And when you create the experience that we've shown through research, the retention of the information shared is significantly higher than in a traditional environment. So we're working here from the first part of the opening general session building up through the last close in showing examples, bringing tools, sharing best practices for planners to rethink the actual attendee experience. We began with Deepak Chopra talking about the mental side, the wellness side of the experience. And we build throughout the event with different speakers, different classes and exercises, up through an individual like Magic Johnson, who helped reinvent the NBA, creating the Showtime experience.
Okay.
And took a very struggling franchise into one of the most popular sports franchises in the world. So that's what this is all about. But at the same time, it's giving them opportunity to mingle with each other, share best practices, network, have some fun. We've got some great fundraising events at night that'll help fund our foundation. We've got the Big Deal, which is a really exciting professional poker tournament that our community can actually play and participate in while raising money for charity. We've got the President's Dinner tomorrow night where we're honoring the great Ray Bloom
Yeah.
for everything he's done for this industry. And everyone can have fun in those, but they also have opportunity to share ideas and share best practices and meet new people.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us, you have a lot of new educational initiatives and curriculum happening now. Why don't you tell our viewers about that and especially about the emergency preparedness?
Yeah, great. Well, as we rethought about MPI 3 or 4 years ago about what is the value MPI delivers and why do people want to engage in this community and be part of MPI. And what came out very clearly is that people are looking for a professional home. And what that meant is they believe as a professional association, MPI is their place to learn and grow themselves personally and professionally to help their careers. So with that focus, we realized we had to be primarily and first and foremost around delivering educational opportunities. We created the MPI Academy to bring a strategic focus to that. Instead of being tactical in our content approach, really looking at it from a broad perspective of what does our community need and ask for. Wherever they are in their career, whether new, whether seasoned, whether they are changing career paths, we want to make sure we're providing the right curriculum to make them a richer, more effective performer within their roles. Right now, the hottest item, the hottest topic is security.
Yeah.
And security is really coming about because of a lot of the terrorist issues that have unfortunately hit us in many places around the world. But as we begin to think about security, what we want to talk to our planner membership about and our suppliers is just overall disaster preparedness and risk management.
Yeah.
Less than 50% of planners have disaster management plans in place for
It's
their events.
amazing.
It's amazing. So we believe there's a lot of opportunity and a role for us to help educate the planners, educate the suppliers, give them tools and resources to improve what they're doing. And then long-term, we're partnering with the University of Southern Mississippi, their department called NCS4, which specializes in sports event security and how to develop gold standards for our specific live events industry.
Well, great. Sounds like there's a lot of stuff going on at MPI. And
Great.
you're going to be busy getting all this stuff going and enjoying the rest of the conference.
Well,
too.
we have a wonderful conference planned out, a lot happening, whether it's educational growth. One of the more exciting developments for us is redoing our entire digital environment. And when we're complete with that, when we're done redoing our website and our e-learning platforms, it's going to provide a much more engaging, consistent experience with richer content for our community. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, we'll be looking out for that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.